Woman found an old photo and realized her husband had lied all along. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I used to believe I knew my husband completely. 23 years of marriage creates that illusion, that comfortable certainty that comes from sharing morning coffee rituals, knowing exactly how he likes his eggs, recognizing the sound of his key in the lock. David was my anchor, steady and predictable in the most reassuring way. He came home at 6:15 every evening, kissed my forehead, and asked about my day while loosening his tie. Weekends meant gardening together, his hands gentle with the tomato plants, mine busy with the roses he'd given me for our 10th anniversary. Our house on Maple Street reflected our life together, orderly, warm, filled with photographs documenting our journey. Wedding pictures lined the hallway, David so young and nervous in his rented tuxedo, me radiant in my grandmother's dress. Vacation snapshots covered the refrigerator. Camping in Yellowstone, that disastrous attempt at skiing in Vermont. Countless family barbecues where David would flip burgers while I arranged potato salad on paper plates. He was the kind of man mothers hoped their daughters would marry. Reliable, devoted, never one to raise his voice or come home late without calling. His colleagues at the insurance company respected him. Our neighbors borrowed his tools and returned them cleaned. When Mrs. Henderson's husband died, David spent 3 Saturdays fixing her gutters without being asked. I suppose that's why the photograph hit me like a physical blow. It was a rainy Thursday in October when I decided to tackle the attic. David had been after me for months to sort through the boxes up there, old college textbooks, Christmas decorations, my mother's china that we never used but couldn't bear to donate. The realtor had been clear. If we wanted to downsize, we needed to declutter. David was 58, thinking about early retirement, and the house suddenly felt too large for just the two of us. The attic smelled of dust and memories. Afternoon light filtered through the small window, illuminating dancing motes that made me sneeze. I'd been up there for 2 hours, methodically going through boxes, when I reached for one marked D's college stuff in David's careful handwriting. It should have contained his engineering textbooks, maybe some fraternity memorabilia, nothing more interesting than old term papers. The box was heavier than expected. When I lifted it, the bottom gave way, cheap cardboard finally surrendering to time and moisture. Papers scattered across the attic floor like autumn leaves, and I knelt among them, gathering grade reports and yellowed lecture notes. That's when I saw it, face down beneath a stack of economics homework, a photograph with something written on the back in David's younger handwriting. Sarah and Emily, Christmas 1998. My girls forever. My hands trembled as I turned it over. The image was clear despite its age. David, looking perhaps 35, his arm around a woman I'd never seen. She was beautiful in an understated way, with auburn hair and a warm smile that reached her eyes. Beside them stood a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with David's distinctive green eyes and his stubborn cowlick. The child was holding David's free hand, gazing up at him with obvious adoration. I stared at that photograph for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Christmas 1998. We'd been married 13 years by then. I remembered that Christmas clearly. We'd hosted David's parents, and he'd given me diamond earrings that I'd treasured ever since. We'd talked about children that year, our ongoing struggle with infertility, the silent disappointment that shadowed every holiday. Yet here he was, smiling down at a child who looked unmistakably like him, his arm around a woman who fit against his side with the easy familiarity of long intimacy. The rational part of my mind scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe it was his cousin's family. Maybe he'd just been holding the camera, and someone else had snapped this shot. Maybe the resemblance was coincidental. But the inscription haunted me. My girls forever. Not Dave with Sarah and Emily, or Christmas at the Johnsons. My girls, forever. I sat on the attic floor, surrounded by the detritus of David's college years, feeling like I'd stumbled into someone else's life. The photograph burned in my hands. Every logical explanation crumbled under the weight of what I was seeing. This wasn't casual friendship or extended family obligation. This was intimacy. This was love. When David came home that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen, the photograph face down on the counter, beside his usual glass of iced tea. I'd spent hours rehearsing what to say, how to ask the question that might shatter everything I believed about my marriage. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing my forehead exactly as he had every evening for 23 years. "Fine," I managed. "David, I was cleaning out the attic." Something shifted in his expression, so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching so carefully. A tightening around his eyes, a hesitation before he reached for his tea. "Find anything interesting?" His voice was casual, but I caught the underlying tension. I turned the photograph over and slid it across the counter. "Who are Sarah and Emily?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. David picked up the photograph, and I watched his face transform. For a moment, his careful composure slipped, revealing something raw and unguarded. Love, longing, guilt. Then the mask returned. That's from a long time ago." He set the picture down without looking at it again. "Before we were married." "The inscription says Christmas 1998. We'd been married 13 years. "I must have mixed up the dates. You know how bad I am with that stuff." But David wasn't bad with dates. He remembered our anniversary to the hour, never forgot a birthday or important milestone. He kept meticulous records for everything: tax documents, home repairs, even oil changes for the car. The man who could tell me exactly when we'd planted each rosebush in our garden didn't mix up dates. "She's beautiful," I said quietly. "The little girl has your eyes." "People say that about lots of kids. It doesn't mean anything." He was already moving toward the hallway, clearly hoping the conversation was over. But I couldn't let it go. Not when everything I thought I knew about my life was shifting beneath my feet. "David, please, just tell me who they are." He paused in the doorway, his back to me. When he spoke, his voice was tired. "It's complicated, Helen. Can we just leave it alone?" That night, he went to bed early, claiming a headache. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the photographs that had always represented our shared history, and wondered what else I didn't know. The woman in the picture, Sarah, had been laughing at something, her hand resting naturally on David's chest. The child, Emily, wore a red velvet dress and had chocolate on her chin. They looked like a family. They looked happy. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face when he'd looked at that photograph. Not surprise or confusion, but recognition, longing. The expression of a man seeing something precious that he'd lost. The next morning, David left for work earlier than usual, mumbling something about a client meeting. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner, then returned to the attic with purpose. If there was one photograph, there might be more. I found them in a manila envelope taped to the inside of a box labeled Tax Records, 1995, 2000. A dozen pictures, all carefully preserved, chronicling what looked like several years of David's life that I'd known nothing about. Sarah pushing Emily on a swing, both of them laughing. David teaching the little girl to ride a bicycle, his hand steady on her back. Sarah and David at what looked like a wedding, him in a dark suit, her in a blue dress that complemented her eyes. The pictures weren't hidden hastily or carelessly. Someone had taken time to preserve them, to keep them safe. These weren't old college friends or distant relatives. These were memories that someone had wanted to protect. I spread the photographs on the kitchen table, arranging them chronologically as best I could. Emily appeared to age from about 4 to maybe 8 across the span of the images. In the earliest pictures, she was a chubby-cheeked toddler reaching for David's glasses. In the latest, she was gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a school art project. The timeline made my stomach clench. These photos spanned 1996 to 2001, according to the dates stamped on the backs. During those years, David and I had been trying desperately to have children. I'd endured fertility treatments, hormone injections, 2 miscarriages that had left us both devastated. I remembered how gentle David had been during those dark months, how he'd held me while I cried, promising that we'd get through it together, that maybe children weren't in our cards, but we had each other. All while he apparently had a daughter he'd never mentioned. The last photograph was different from the others. It showed only David and Emily, taken at what looked like an airport or train station. Emily, maybe 8 years old, was crying, her small arms wrapped around David's neck. His face was pressed against her hair, and even in the still image, I could see his shoulders shaking. Someone had written, "Goodbye for now, Daddy," on the back. I sank into my chair, the photograph trembling in my hands. Daddy, not Uncle Dave or family friend. Daddy. My husband had a daughter who called him Daddy, who looked like him, who had been part of his life for years while I'd grieved our childlessness and blamed my broken body for our empty house. The betrayal cut so deep I couldn't breathe. Not just the existence of Emily, but the cruelty of it. How many nights had David comforted me after failed fertility treatments while knowing he had a child somewhere? How many Mother's Days had I spent in quiet despair while he'd probably been thinking of Sarah, who'd given him what I never could? I called in sick to work and spent the day on the computer, searching for Sarah and Emily. Social media made the impossible possible these days. If they existed, if they were real, I would find them. It took hours of careful detective work, cross-referencing the few clues I had. Sarah's full name, based on a prescription bottle I'd found in another box, was Sarah Mitchell. Emily would be around 28 now, if my calculations were correct. I searched through Facebook profiles, Instagram accounts, LinkedIn pages, building a picture of their lives piece by piece. I found Emily first. Emily Mitchell, now Emily Parker, living in Portland with her husband and 2 young children. Her Facebook profile was partially public, filled with pictures of weekend hikes and family barbecues. She had David's eyes, David's smile, David's way of tilting her head when she laughed. Her children, my husband's grandchildren, were beautiful, with Emily's auburn hair and bright, curious faces. Finding Sarah was harder, but eventually I tracked her down through Emily's tagged photos. Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Hoffman, still living in the same small town where the original photographs had been taken. She'd remarried, based on the name change, but there were still pictures of Emily throughout her timeline, marking graduations and weddings, and the births of those grandchildren David would never meet. Never meet because he'd chosen me. He'd chosen our marriage, our life, our childless house with its perfect garden, and carefully arranged photograph albums that told the story of a love affair but omitted the most important chapter of his life. The more I learned, the more the betrayal crystallized into something sharper than pain. Emily had been 3 when David and I married. The timeline suggested he'd been with Sarah for several years, long enough to build a life, to have a child, to become someone's daddy. Then he'd left. He'd walked away from his daughter to marry me. Or had he? The photographs suggested ongoing contact. Christmas 1998. Emily's 8th birthday party, based on one snapshot I'd found. David teaching her to drive in what looked like our driveway, though I'd never seen that car before. My hands shook as I realized the implications. David hadn't just left his first family, he'd maintained a relationship with them throughout our marriage. All those weekend business trips, the client meetings that ran late, the conferences that took him away for days at a time. How many of those had been visits to Emily? How many lies had I accepted without question? When David came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with all the photographs spread before me like evidence at a trial. He stopped in the doorway, seeing his secret life laid bare, and his face went white. "Helen, I can explain." 23 years, I said quietly. 23 years of marriage, and you never mentioned that you have a daughter. He moved toward the table, then stopped, as if afraid to get closer. "It's complicated." "No, David, it's not complicated. It's a lie. A 23-year lie." "I wanted to tell you. God, Helen, you have no idea how many times I wanted to tell you." "But you didn't." I picked up the photograph of him and Emily at the airport. "You let me believe we were childless while you were saying goodbye to your daughter at train stations." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" My voice cracked, years of suppressed anger finally breaking through. "Tell me what it was like to hold me while I cried about our fertility problems, knowing you had a child somewhere. Tell me what it was like to comfort me after my miscarriages while you were planning weekend visits with Emily." David sank into the chair across from me, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. "I loved Sarah. We were together for 4 years. And Emily. Emily was everything to me. But Sarah wanted marriage, wanted the white picket fence life, and I wasn't ready. I was building my career, trying to figure out who I was. We fought constantly about commitment, about the future. So you left. I tried to stay, but the fighting was affecting Emily, and Sarah said, she said maybe we should take a break. Think about what we really wanted. And what you really wanted was me. I met you 6 months later. You were so different from Sarah, calm, stable, supportive. You believed in me in ways Sarah never had. When we got married, I thought I could leave the past behind, start fresh. But you didn't leave the past behind. You kept visiting them." David's composure finally cracked. Tears ran down his cheeks as he nodded. "Emily was my daughter. I couldn't just abandon her. Sarah and I worked out an arrangement. I could see Emily on weekends, help with school expenses, be part of her life. But Sarah made it clear that I couldn't have both. If I wanted to see Emily, I had to keep it separate from my marriage." "Sarah made that decision? Or did you?" "What do you mean? Did Sarah tell you not to mention Emily? Or were you afraid I wouldn't marry you if I knew you had a child?" The silence stretched between us, and I had my answer. "You were afraid," I whispered. "You were afraid I'd leave if I knew the truth." "Helen, please, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly." I stood up, gathering the photographs with trembling hands. "I understand that you've been living a double life for our entire marriage. I understand that you let me blame myself for our childlessness while you had a daughter you saw on weekends. I understand that you made me an unwitting accomplice in abandoning your child. I never abandoned Emily. You compartmentalized her. You made her your dirty secret, something to be hidden from your real life. Do you have any idea what that must have done to her? Growing up knowing her father was ashamed to admit she existed?" David buried his face in his hands. "It wasn't supposed to be forever. I kept thinking I'd find the right time to tell you, the right way to explain. But the longer it went on, the harder it became. How do you tell your wife of 10 years that you've been lying since the day you met? How do you tell her you have a teenage daughter she's never met? You tell her the truth. You trust her to love you enough to handle it. Would you have? Would you have married me if you'd known?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Would I have married David, knowing he had a daughter with another woman? Would I have been willing to share him with a family I could never truly be part of? 23 years ago, young and naive and desperately in love, I honestly didn't know. But that wasn't the point anymore. "You didn't give me that choice," I said. "You decided for both of us. You decided I couldn't handle the truth, and you've been living with the consequences ever since." "Helen, please, don't let this destroy everything we've built." "What have we built, David? A marriage based on lies? A love that required you to abandon your child? A life where I've spent 2 decades feeling inadequate because I couldn't give you children, never knowing you already had one you were hiding from me? I walked to the window, looking out at our perfect garden, our perfect neighborhood, our perfect life that had never been real. Does Emily know about me? Yes. She's always known I was married. Does she know why you kept her a secret? I told her. I told her you wouldn't understand. That you came from a traditional family and wouldn't accept her. The final betrayal. Not only had David hidden Emily from me, he'd made me the villain in her story. For over 2 decades, his daughter had believed her father's wife was too narrow-minded, too selfish to accept her existence. You made me the reason, I whispered. You made me the bad guy, so you wouldn't have to face what you'd really done. Helen. How old is she now? Emily? 28. And she has children? 2, a boy and a girl. Your grandchildren? David nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face. Do you see them? Sometimes. When I'm supposedly at conferences. Sarah remarried 10 years ago. A good man who treats Emily like his own daughter. But she still calls me Dad. She still wants me in her life. I turned back to face my husband, this stranger who'd shared my bed for 23 years, while keeping the most important part of himself locked away. I need you to leave. What? I need you to pack a bag and leave. Tonight. I can't look at you right now without seeing every lie, every manipulation, every moment you chose deception over trust. Helen, please. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. I need time to think. Time to figure out what's real and what's been performance. Time to decide if there's anything left worth saving. David stood slowly, like an old man, his shoulders bent under the weight of his exposed secrets. I love you. I know you don't believe that right now, but I do love you. I've loved you every day for 23 years. You loved me enough to lie to me every day for 23 years. I'm not sure I can tell the difference anymore. He packed quickly, mechanically, taking only what he needed for a few days. I watched from our bedroom doorway as he folded shirts and gathered toiletries. This intimate stranger performing the mundane ritual of temporary departure. At the front door, he paused. What do I tell people? At work, I mean. My parents. Tell them the truth. It might be a new experience for you. After he left, I sat in our living room surrounded by the photographs that had once represented our happy marriage. Now they looked different staged, incomplete, a carefully curated exhibition that showed only what David had wanted me to see. I picked up the phone and dialed information, asking for Emily Parker in Portland, Oregon. My hands shook as I waited for the connection. Hello? The voice was warm, tentative, David's voice in a higher register. Emily, this is Helen Morrison. I'm David's wife. The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. Then, oh my God! You found out. I found photographs in the attic. He said you didn't know. All these years, he said you couldn't know because you wouldn't understand. I'm beginning to think I don't understand anything. I took a shaky breath. Emily, I need you to know I never knew about you. If I had known, things would have been different. I would have made sure you knew you were welcome in our lives. She was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. I used to imagine meeting you. When I was little, I'd make up stories about why my dad couldn't tell his wife about me. I thought maybe you were sick, or mean, or just wouldn't like me. Oh, sweetheart, no, never that. I have kids now. 2 beautiful children who don't understand why Grandpa Dave can only visit when Mommy takes them to special places, why there are no pictures of him in our house, why we can't call him when we want to. The weight of David's deception crushed down on me. It wasn't just my marriage he destroyed with his lies. It was Emily's sense of belonging, her children's relationship with their grandfather, Sarah's ability to move forward without the constant reminder of a man who wouldn't fully commit to either of his families. Would you like to meet? I asked. I mean, if you're comfortable with it, I'd love to see you, to know you. Really? You'd want that? Emily, you're David's daughter. You're part of who he is, part of what made him the man I fell in love with. I should have known you existed. I should have been part of your life from the beginning. We talked for 2 hours. Emily told me about her childhood, the confusion of having a father who loved her, but couldn't publicly claim her. She told me about school plays where she'd saved a seat for him that often stayed empty, about graduation ceremonies where she'd introduced him as her friend to avoid uncomfortable questions. She told me about her mother's remarriage, how her stepfather had been more present in the last 10 years than David had been in the previous 15. She told me about her own struggles with trust, how her father's compartmentalized love had made it hard to believe anyone could love her completely without conditions or secrets. By the time I hung up, I knew what I had to do. David returned 3 days later, looking haggard and hopeful. He found me in the kitchen, making coffee for one. "Can we talk?" he asked. "I've been talking. To Emily, to Sarah, to your grandchildren, actually." Emily put them on the phone. "They're remarkable kids, David. You should be proud." His face lit up. "You talked to them? To Emily?" "She's beautiful, inside and out. She looks like you, but she has Sarah's strength. She's built a good life despite having a father who taught her that love comes with conditions and secrets." "Helen, I know I made mistakes." "You made choices. Every day for 23 years, you chose deception over trust. You chose comfortable lies over difficult truths. You chose to protect yourself rather than protect the people you claim to love." I poured coffee into my mug, deliberately not offering him any. "I'm filing for divorce." "Helen, no. Please, we can fix this. I'll do anything." "There's nothing to fix, David. This isn't a problem that can be solved with apologies or promises. This is who you are. A man who compartmentalizes love, who decides what truth other people can handle, who builds his happiness on other people's ignorance." "That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" I set down my mug with enough force to slosh coffee onto the counter. Was it fair to let me spend 23 years believing we were childless together? Was it fair to let Emily grow up thinking her father was ashamed of her? Was it fair to make Sarah the villain in your double life, forcing her to choose between her daughter's happiness and her own dignity? I was trying to protect everyone. You were trying to protect yourself. From difficult conversations, from complicated emotions, from having to choose between 2 lives you wanted to keep separate. David sank into a chair, looking defeated. "What about our life together? Our marriage? Doesn't that mean anything?" Our marriage was built on a lie. Every "I love you," every anniversary celebration, every moment of intimacy was shadowed by your deception. I don't even know who you really are, David. The man I married doesn't exist. Yes, he does. The man who loves you, who built this life with you, that's real. Is it? Or is it just another compartment? Another carefully constructed version of yourself, designed to give me what you thought I wanted, while keeping the inconvenient truths hidden away. I walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the roses David had given me, the garden we'd tended together, the physical manifestation of a life that had never been as real as I'd believed. "I talked to a lawyer yesterday," I continued. "I want half of everything, including the house. I'm moving to Portland." "Portland? Why?" "To be near Emily, to be the step-grandmother her children deserve, to try to build the relationship with your daughter that you never gave me the chance to have." You can't just uproot your entire life for people you barely know. They're not people I barely know, David. They're your family. They should have been my family, too. All these years, I could have been Emily's stepmother, helping her through teenage heartbreak and celebrating her achievements. I could have been a grandmother to those beautiful children, spoiling them and babysitting and being part of their lives. You can still do that. Not with you. Not while you're still lying. Still compartmentalizing, still deciding what truth everyone else can handle. I turned to face him. Emily asked me something yesterday. She asked if I thought you loved her. Of course I love her, she's my daughter. I told her you loved her the way you knew how, but that your kind of love came with conditions. It required secrecy and shame and separation. I told her she deserved better. Helen, so do I, David. I deserve better than a man who loves me enough to lie to me every day. I deserve a relationship built on trust and truth, not careful deception and managed reality. The conversation continued for hours, circling through anger and pleading, recrimination and desperate promises. David swore he would tell everyone about Emily, integrate his families, live openly for the first time in decades. But it was 23 years too late. Trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be rebuilt with words. The foundation of our marriage had been rotten from the beginning, built on David's decision that I couldn't handle his truth. Even if he changed now, even if he became a different man, I would always know that his first instinct had been to protect himself by deceiving me. I moved to Portland 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Emily helped me find a small apartment near her house, close enough for spontaneous visits, but far enough to maintain healthy boundaries. Sarah and I met for coffee, two women who had loved the same complicated man in different ways and had both paid the price for his inability to love completely. He called me, Sarah told me over lattes in a coffee shop that smelled of cinnamon and possibility. He wanted to know if I thought you'd ever come back. What did you tell him? I told him that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt, that some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. But I also told him that losing you might finally teach him what his compartmentalized love has cost all of us. Emily's children accepted me with the easy grace of youth. To them, I was simply Grandma Helen, a new addition to their expanding universe of love. They didn't need to understand the complicated history that had brought me into their lives. They only cared that I showed up, that I was present, that I loved them without conditions or secrets. David visits sometimes, awkward and uncertain in this new dynamic, where his two worlds have collided. He's trying to be different, to be the father and grandfather Emily's family deserves. But decades of compartmentalized living aren't easily overcome. Emily and I are building something new, not the mother-daughter relationship we might have had if David had been honest from the beginning, but a friendship rooted in mutual respect and shared understanding of what it means to love someone who keeps pieces of himself hidden away. On quiet evenings in my new apartment, I sometimes think about the woman I was before I found that photograph. She seemed so naive now, so trusting in her belief that love meant knowing someone completely. I don't miss her ignorance, but I occasionally mourn her faith. The truth, as painful as it was, had set me free. Free from a marriage built on lies. Free from the burden of trying to be enough for a man who had never been fully present. Free to build relationships based on honesty rather than careful omission. I kept one photograph from David's secret collection, the one of Emily as a little girl, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a school art project. It sits on my refrigerator now, next to pictures of her children, visible proof that some truths are too important to hide, no matter how uncomfortable they might be. The woman who found that photograph in her attic thought her life was ending. She was wrong. It was just beginning.